More questions, sir?
Yeah. So I have a follow-up to it. I agree with what Henry was saying in terms of like the culture, right? The culture is to overclassify currently, but I also think there's a culture, right, to fight the tools that you're mentioning. So how do you address that if you want to do this right and to kind of attack that culture issue of changing their current processes?
I think it's really important. This is going to sound off, but I work in the Pentagon. Okay. And it's an interesting large organization. I assume working in the intelligence community is equally interesting. And what I mean by that is if you don't have a sense of humor and you don't have someone who's persistent in various places that gets what's going on. I mean, I briefed one of the senators here yesterday, and he said, well, how do you see it? And I said, well, we should be so lucky as to think that our problem is China. That's easy. If you don't fix this, game over. And I don't think people see it that way.
Well, I think it deals to how we understand what an informed public is, how we have true informed democratic debate. Any more questions?
Well, I do have one announcement.
We know what's the
So Senator Warner talked a little bit
Wait,
about...
say who you are.
Oh, sorry, I'm Brad Gates. I actually worked on Conga along with that.
You might tell people what...
Oh, Conga's the... You look at
The dance is
acronym. This is an acronym-free zone.
It's an acronym for a Consolidated NGA Classification Guide. It's the slides that we developed are actually in the report along with Taylor, Mike, and Steve in the back. So Senator Warner talked a little bit about like a tax, whatever that means, on overclassification. Is there anything in the legislation, or is there anything anybody's been talking about the back end of that in terms of having some sort of protection for the individuals that are actually trying to drive lower classifications that aren't going to drive lower classifications because they're afraid they're going to get an unauthorized disclosure and then personnel security is going to come crashing down on them. They could potentially lose their job, their clearance, livelihood, etc. That really is the very simple explanation as to why overclassification exists in the federal government. What is being done to address that side of the house?
Well, we're holding this meeting, and it's being taken.
So I think what's helpful about that is, as you're saying, is if the default is going to be, it needs to be unclassified. The theory is the person who wants to maintain a classification at what level, they have to make the case. And then, as you're saying, if the case is not made or doesn't carry the day, there needs to be a process in which those individuals will say, I'm following the law, if this becomes a law, that there's some safe harbor. That you have to demonstrate there had been a process, an argument made to keep the document classified. At that point in time, it was considered not a winning argument. It became unclassified. And they also have in the document, if it turns out that that was an error, it can be reclassified. But it has to, again, carry a very strong burden of proof to make sure that you can do it. I think what your question is, will there be a process that protects those individuals in order for them to make the argument or reject an argument for classification? That's going to be, I think, the sticking point as you put your finger on it. We also have some ISU members. Would they like to join the fray here? I'm a law professor, so I cold call all the time. So anyone from ISU would like to talk about anything that they'd like to deal with?
No, we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
We know that's not true, but that's great.
Yes, Henry. I was ready. I mean, the reason I wrote the report is we had all these meetings. I spent a certain amount of money, and I felt guilty. Maybe I should write up the findings. And so I did. I was not planning to bother with this topic. It seemed to me to be, pretty much a lost cause. I think at some level it still is. But because of the events, I have to hand it to the Wall Street Journal. I owe you something. I don't know what.
Well, we're on the record, so let's keep it going.
Well, I mean, that they decided to spotlight this thing, and then luckily we had this disaster. I think there's a real need for the folks without clearances outside of the government, that would be people like me, but there are others besides me, to actually hold meetings and get these kinds of points out. I don't think enough attention is being paid to this. I think that may have changed now, and we have to, get to the point where it isn't just for breakfast, but for every single meal. We have to start talking about this at every turn. I think that's the significance of today's meeting, I hope.
I'll let Ben have the last word.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you, Henry, for the report and these pieces. I think there's been a lot of jumping off and momentum here. I mentioned Director Haynes coming to the board's meeting in Texas and speaking about that, and what we've tried to do to build on these things to bring attention to these issues. So I think all of these pieces coming together, and obviously the hard work of the staff of the Senate Intelligence Committee, pulling this together and bringing attention to it, and that's what we need to build on to keep this going.
Great. Well, for the record, I want to thank Henry and NPEC for their lovely report and sponsoring this. Is wonderful.
Well,
I also
co-sponsored.
I want to also thank him because I wrote a chapter. He's a very light editor, and I always appreciate that when you do these things.
You can send your editorial comments.
But I also am thinking, if you're thinking of beach reading, this is something that's perfect, the way it's bound, so you can get stamped and still be cleaned off, so you can pass it around for gifts. And I particularly, for the record, want to thank the senators for having spent the time to come and do this, and all of the extraordinary staff that make this happen.
Yes.
And particularly NGA for helping to set. It's clear that could be done.
May I add that there was an awful lot of support from Senator Rounds' office.
Absolutely.
And to be honest, we're lucky.
So to both the senators, the chairman and senator, and to the press that came, and hopefully we'll keep this alive. And I know there are many people who will be more than happy to talk to you on the record and off the record if you so choose. So with that, thank you so much. I'll give you half an hour back. And before food, take lunches back to your office.
Yes.
Or take the lunch home for dinner, but please feel free to take it. Thank you.